Hello and welcome back to the channel. In this video, we're going to be doing an exercise to strengthen your understanding of forms in our React applications. So this is what our application is going to look like. It's going to have a filter where we can filter out our contacts. Then it's going to have a form where we're going to put in a name and a number. Then we can add that number to our contacts. And at the bottom of the page, it's going to display the different contacts we added. So we're going to create a folder called Phone Book Exercise. Then we're going to open our terminal and we're going to cd into that folder. Then we're going to run our commands. We're going to call our project phone book. And we're going to be using the React template. Once that's done, we're going to cd into our project. And in here, we're going to install our dependencies. Once that's done, we're going to go to the source folder and delete the unnecessary files. We're also going to clear out our main and our app file. In our main file, we're going to import the app component. We're also going to import React DOM. And in here, we're going to define our collection, which in this case is going to be the names of people and their number. So we're going to call it persons. And it's going to be an array, and each element is going to be an object with a name attribute. So let's put in John. There's also going to be a number attribute. So we're going to put in a random number. And finally, it's going to have an ID attribute. And once we've defined our collection, we're going to render our component to the screen using React DOM. And in the render function, we're going to pass in the app component and we're going to give it an input, which is going to be our persons collection. Now we can save our main file and go to the app file. Since we're going to be using state, we're going to import it. Then we're going to define our app component, which is going to take an input. We're using props here to avoid ambiguity since we're going to be having a state variable called persons. So the first state we're going to have is going to be called persons and set persons. And we're going to set it equal to useState. And initially it's going to have our collection. So it's going to be props.persons. The next state variable we're going to have is the name variable and the set name. And we're going to use the state function and we're going to give it an empty string as its initial value. And the final state we're going to have is the number state and the set number. And we're going to set it equal to useState. And it's going to have an initial value of an empty string. Now we're going to write our return statement. So first we're going to have an h1 tag that says phone book. Then we're going to define our form. Since we want the different elements to be on separate lines, we're going to use a div. And inside the div, we're going to have our input tag. So we're going to have name, then we're going to have our input tag. For the second one, we're going to have number, and we're going to have another input tag. And finally, we're going to have a button of type submit. And it's going to have the text add. Now the input tags are going to have a value attribute, which is going to be our state variables. So the first one is going to have the name variable, and the second input is going to have the number variable. And as we saw in the previous video, we also need an onChange attribute, which is going to run when the user tries to change the input field. So for the first one, we're going to have handle name change. And for the second one, we're also going to have an onChange attribute, and we're going to pass in handle number change. Now we're going to define these functions. So first, let's define handle name change. And it's simply going to use the set name function, and it's going to set it to event.target.value, which is whatever value is inside the input field. We also need to pass in event as a parameter. And next, we're going to define the handle number change function, which also takes in an event. And it's going to use the set number function, and it's going to set the number variable to event.target.value. Now we've dealt with the input tags, so we're going to go to our form tag and add the onSubmit attribute. So when the form is submitted, we want this function to run. We're going to call it save person, and we're going to define this function. So we're going to have save person. It's going to take an event as an input. And here, if you remember, the first thing we have to do is call event.prevent default, which is going to prevent the default behavior of submitting a form. Then we're going to create our person object, our new person. So we're going to call it new person. And now the attributes must match the one we already created in our main file. So it's going to have a name attribute, and we're going to set it to the name variable. It's going to have a number attribute, and we're going to set it to the number variable. And finally, it's going to have an ID, which for now we're going to set to persons.length, so the length of our list plus 1, since it's going to be added at the bottom of our list. Once we have our person, we're going to use the set persons function, and we're going to pass in whatever persons is, and we're going to concatenate our new person object. Once we've done that, we want to clear out the input. So we're going to call set name and pass it an empty string. And we're going to call set number and also pass it an empty string. And finally, we're going to go to the return statement, and we're going to actually display the different numbers. So we're going to have a header that says numbers. Then we're going to have a div tag, and in here, in curly braces, we're going to call persons.map, which is going to give us an individual person. And here we want to return a p tag with the person's name, followed by a space, then the person's number. Now, one thing we should remember here is that since we're dealing with a list of people, we need to provide a key attribute, and we're going to give it person.id. And now we can export our component. So we're going to export default app, and we're going to save our file and open the terminal. We're going to navigate to our project, which is in phonebook exercise, and we're going to cd into phonebook. And here we're going to run npm run dev. And now we're going to open our browser. As you can see, our collection has rendered, so we already have John Smith. So we're going to add an additional contact. So let's put in Abel, and let's put in a random number. And when we press add, we get the contact added to numbers. Next, we're going to add a filter functionality. So our filter is simply going to filter out the person's list by name. So to do that, we're going to need another state called filter and set filter. And we're going to assign it to use state. And initially, we're going to give it an empty string. Now in our return statement, we're going to have a div that says filter, and it's going to have an input field, and we're going to set the value of this input to our filter variable. It also needs to have an onChange attribute, and we're going to set it equal to handle filter change. So we need to define this function. So we're going to have const handle filter change, which is going to have an event as an input. And here we're going to use the set filter function, and we're going to pass in event.target.value. So now we've handled the filter change. So now we're going to define a new variable. We're going to call it persons to show, and we're going to use the ternary operator. If you don't know what that is, I've explained it in the previous video. So here we're going to have a condition. So the condition is going to be if filter.length is equal to 0, that means the filter input field is empty. In that case, we want this to be the same as our persons list as a whole. But if the filter is not empty, then we're going to use the filter function to filter out the people based on their name. So we're going to have persons.filter, which is going to give us the individual person. And now if we return true, then this person is going to be included in the filter. And if we return false, this person is not going to be included in the filter. So to do this, we're going to use another function called includes. So for readability purposes, we're going to move this to a new line. And here we're going to have person.name, which is going to give us the name attribute of the person. Then we're going to convert it to lowercase using the toLowercase function. Then we're going to use the includes function, and we're going to pass in our filter, which is also going to be converted to lowercase. Converting it to lowercase lets us make our filter case insensitive, and the includes function simply checks if the person's name includes the filter. And once we have this variable, we're going to use it in our return statement. So instead of displaying persons, we're going to display persons to show. Now we can save our file and go to the browser. For readability purposes, we can actually move the filter to the top. So now, as you can see, we have a filter input, and we're going to add some names. So let's add in Abebe, and we're going to give it a random number. Let's add Kabede, and we're going to also give it a random number. And now let's minimize our console so we can see the full page. And in our filter, if we put in J, as you can see, only John is shown. If we put in A, only Abebe is shown. And if we put in K, only Kabede is shown. So our filter works. Finally, let's add one more functionality that doesn't allow the user to add the same name twice to the contacts. So to do that, we're going to go to the save person function. And in here, before we call the set persons function, we're going to check some conditions. So let's declare a variable called exists. And initially, we're going to give it a value of false. Then using the for each function, we're going to loop through our persons array, which is going to give us a person parameter. And in here, we want to check a condition. So if person.name is equal to the new person we created dot name. So we're going to check the name attributes. And if they are the same, we want to set our exists variable to true. So once we've done that, we're going to get out of the for each statement. And here we're going to have an if condition. So if exists, that means the contact already exists. And in that case, we want to use the alert function, which is going to pop up a message box. And in that message box, we want to display, here we're going to use a formatted string. So we're going to have the new person dot name. And we're going to say this person is already added to phone book. This is going to happen if the person already exists. If that is not the case, that means exists is false, then we want to add that person. So in that case, we were going to move the set persons function inside the else statement. So now we can save our file and go to the browser. And now if we try to add a person with the same name, let's put in John Smith and give it a random number. And if we press on add, we get our message box that says John Smith already added to phone book. So this has been an exercise on forms. As a challenge, you can refactor our code to use multiple components. Thank you for watching this video, and don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel to show your support.